Anyway, I've just had some time with Dr. Mark Geisberger, who's shown him around our new facility, and got to know him a little bit. So I'm really pleased that he's been able to come up here tonight. He's going to talk about a number of things, including, I think, the sonic fill. We're quite excited about the sonic fill. We're going to introduce them into our clinics, and the students will be able to use them later this year. Dr. Geisberger's had 20 years' experience in dental education. He's got numerous publications, including a textbook about aesthetic dentistry and clinical practice. He's presented nationally and internationally, and he's given over 200 continuing education programs. I think he holds a chair in restorative at the University of the Pacific, is that right?
That's right.
Right. Okay. Please welcome Dr. Mark Geisberger.
Thank you, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my second week over here. I'm getting ready to go home this Sunday. Miss my family, but it's been a lot of fun. Aussies are very welcoming, warm people to be with, and I've really enjoyed it. Well, tonight what I'd like to do is bring you some information about adhesive systems that you use in practice, some of the differences, some of the pitfalls and shortcomings, suggest to you when you may consider in practice the use of a self-etcher compared to a total etcher. And then we'll break and talk a little bit about the sonic fill technology. I'll give you some of the research we've done at our university, as well as what others have done in both the adhesive arena and the sonic fill technology, a bulk fill technology. So we'll start by discussing just some principles of adhesive dentistry. Now, I've had the privilege of managing 147 faculty over the last 15 years. And what I know about faculty is they're all very different. They have very strong opinions, and they have unique ideas about things. And they bring them into the school and want to impart them to our students, which is great. Some of my favorite people to talk to are my DDS, PhD, MS with a degree in biomaterials. And I talk to them all the time about adhesives. One of my favorite individuals is German trained. She's a master's in material science, a PhD in material science, and she is an adhesive guru. And when you talk to Karen about adhesives, I always joke around with her. I said, hey, Karen, would you ever go with me to a lecture and let me bond you with OptiBond Solo Plus on top of your hat and stick you up on the roof and let you hang there for the entire presentation? Would you do that for me? And she says, yes, I'd do that for you. And I said, well, let me take it a step further. If every once in a while I ran over and pushed on you while you're hanging there, would you let me do that? And Karen, knowing what she knows about adhesives, says, well, for a while I'd let you do that, but then it'd have to end. And that's because when we do bonding, we form an adhesive joint. And that adhesive joint is between an adherent, something we stick to, and another adherent. And that joint, if left untouched, is quite strong. So if I leave Karen hanging there, she'll stay there indefinitely. However, as soon as Karen gets pushed a bit, we start weakening that joint. And the likelihood of that joint will fail increases as we load the joint. So what you can tell patients is the bonding I've just done will last forever if you never do anything to it. But as soon as you begin to chew on it, you stress this joint. So when we talk about adhesives, we're trying to overcome the forces brought to bear on them through chewing. And it's important to understand that patients deliver different forces. The other thing that will weaken your adhesive joints is thermal change. When we heat something up and cool it back down repeatedly, that stresses that adhesive joint. So we're likely to see that joint weaken over time. Patients who chew ice and drink hot coffee are slowly breaking down adhesive joints. The lifespan of that adhesive joints is based on what you do chairside and what bonding agent you use to establish that joint. So when we talk about bonding, we talk about not so much the agents, but the adherents themselves, dentin and enamel. And we talk about a good adherent. A good adherent is something that will resist the tendency to lose that adhesive joint. A good adherent is something that can be wet easily and likes our liquids. It absorbs our liquids and establishes a strong bond. In addition to wetting capabilities of your adherents, we want good adaptation. So when we get good adaptation, we get a strong bond. When we get mechanical and physical bonding, we get a stronger bond. So we talk about a good adherent being able to receive three types of bond. Not only that physical bond, but a chemical bond with the material we're working with, as well as a mechanical bond. And all of this, as an adherent, will ensure that our bonds are going to last. In addition to that, when you have an adherent and a bonding agent, you need something that can cure readily. And good curing is critical for your bond. So, when a patient calls with an adhesive failure, they'll do so at some point in the lifespan of a restoration. It may be one day, it may be 1 hour, it may be 30 years. But eventually, our adhesive joints weaken and they will fail. And it's a matter of time before that happens. Now, traditionally, we've been taught mechanical retention with amalgams because there is no adhesive joint there. But with composites, we look at things a little differently. So when you talk about failures, you have two types of failures that can occur clinically. The first type, and the most prevalent type, is what's called an adhesive failure. With an adhesive failure, you basically have one adherent debond from the other adherent right at the junction of the bond. Literally cleaves at the bonding agent. So a typical adhesive failure is putting in a ceramic crown with a resin cement that it's adhesively stuck to the dentin, and the patient returns with the crown in hand. The crown may have cement in it, or the tooth may have the cement in it, but both the tooth and the crown are separated at the adhesive joint. That's a typical failure, and that's an adhesive failure. A cohesive failure occurs just a little differently. Generally speaking, when something fails cohesively, the failure occurs within one of the adherents. So a typical cohesive failure is you bond on a veneer or a ceramic onlay, and the patient chips some of the porcelain. When they chip the porcelain, that's called a cohesive failure. Or if they fracture more of the tooth, that's called a cohesive failure. Well, what you see in dental practice is more adhesive failures than cohesive failures. And as you young students get out, though, you'll recognize that you'll probably have a majority of adhesive failures. But things will fail cohesively. So the difference here is not so much in the bond strength of the two failures, but where they fail, the mechanism of failure. So let's say we had a patient come in who's fractured an anterior tooth. Fell in the playground, chipped off a little of the tooth, and we intend to restore that. What adhesive we choose in this situation determines a part of the longevity of that restoration. In addition to that, how we manage the situation clinically determines longevity. It also helps to predict what type of failure we'd have. So we can come in here and use a total etch system and restore this incisal edge and send it on its way. And it will fail. We always tell patients it will fail. Statistically, it will fail. It's a matter of time, hopefully in many years down the road, but it will fail. And when it fails, we expect to see what's called an adhesive failure, meaning the patient will call and say, hey, doc, that filling you did came off. Simple as that. It's come off. And generally when they present, they'll have the same situation as they did when they presented originally. The bonding popped off. And that's important to recognize that most of the time when these things fail, they'll fail adhesively. They can have a cohesive failure, and the cohesive failure could come in two forms. It could come in the form of more of the tooth chipping away, meaning your bonding survived. That adhesive joint was not the weak link, it was the tooth itself. That's a cohesive failure. They could also have a small piece of the porcelain or glass in the composite chip in itself, and that would be another cohesive failure. But most of the time, we expect an adhesive failure of our bonded restorations. So let's talk about this. Now, you all have heard about megapascals, and companies like Kerr and 3M and Dentsply love to quote a megapascal, right? That's the strength of the bond they're going to establish. And that's extremely important. But we recognize that the bond that